All right, this video we're going to do the first part of the 2.1 notes, which is weighted voting. So you'll need your 2.1 notes and a calculator. So we've been talking about elections and voting. So today we're going to look at what is called weighted voting. And this is very common in companies with boards of directors, things like that. So in this case, each voter does not necessarily, let's see if I can spell that right, necessarily have the same number of votes. So for example, maybe it's a company that's jointly owned by 5 people, but one person maybe owns 40% of the company, one person owns 10% of the company, and so on. So their votes are proportional to the amount that they own in the company. So the more percentage that you own, the more votes you get. Okay, so we're going to be looking at what are called motions, where your only 2 choices to vote are yes or no. So maybe you're trying to decide if you want to add a new product to your product line and you're voting yes, we want it, no, we don't. So motions are always going to be yes or no. So as we go through this idea of weighted voting, first we have the players, and these are the voters. So we use some notation for this. We use a capital P, so we're going to denote as P with a subscript of 1, P2, P3, and so on. Now when we're talking about players, players can be people. So players can be individuals, companies, maybe even countries, etc. So we tend to think of players as individual people, but they could be companies or something more than just people. All right, and then we have the weights, and the weights are going to be the number of votes each player gets. So we use a W for this, usually a little w. So W1 is the weight of player 1. And then W2 would be the weight of player 2, and so on. We do generally list the most powerful one as player 1, so the one with the most votes, we tend to list them first and then go down from there. So we're going to use V to represent the total number of votes. So to get the total number of votes, we would need to add up all the individual votes, which means we need to add up all the weights. So we would add up W1 plus W2 plus W3 and so on until we run out of players. All right, now probably the most important thing we're going to talk about today, I'm going to put a big star beside this, is what's called the quota. So the quota is going to be the number of votes needed to pass a motion. Now that sounds really simple, right? Whatever number of votes you need to pass a motion. The problem with quota is the quota will vary. And it kind of depends on the company or whatever it is that you're doing the voting for. So it can range. So the quota can be any number from a majority which we've definitely talked about majority already, to the total number of votes. Okay, so I'm putting a big star beside this because this is important. So the majority is going to be the smallest value that the quota can possibly take, and the total number of votes will be the largest. Okay, so as we're working problems, the quota will vary. Maybe they ask for a majority, maybe they ask for 2/3 or 3/4, or maybe they ask for total number of votes, which would be a unanimous decision. So we're always going to be kind of looking at these two numbers and looking at that range. Okay, so just a little practice on finding majority. Remember, majority means more than half. So if there's 15 votes, if I do half of 15, 15 divided by 2, I get 7.5. So I want more than half of the votes, and I also can't have a partial vote. It's impossible for someone to cast half a vote. So I'm going to round that up. So the majority would be 8. If I have 10 votes, half of 10 would be 5, but remember a majority is more than half, so 5 isn't enough. I have to bump it up, so a majority would be 6. Okay, so if I have 300 votes, half of 300 is 150. That's exactly half. The majority must be more than half, so I bump that up to 151. Okay, so what that means is for these number of votes, the quota could be, for the first one, it could be anywhere from a majority at 8 votes all the way up to total number of votes, which is 15. Okay, so any of these would be considered an acceptable quota for that first example with 15 votes. So if I look at the second example, the majority is the smallest number that the quota could be. It could go up to the total number of votes, which is 10. So my quota could be set at 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. It can be anywhere in that range. And then for the last one, the quota could be from the majority, which is 151, to the total number of votes, which is 300. Okay, so remember this number is your majority, and this number is total number of votes. And then anything in between there is also okay. All right, so let's look at the second page. So we've got some notation to make writing this a little bit easier. All right, so here's the notation, which is more complicated than it looks. So the Q is your quota, so you're going to list your quota first, and then you're going to list the weights of each of the players. So remember, weights is just number of votes. You start with the biggest and work your way down. So for example, let's say that we have a quota of 12, and then one player has 2 votes, one has 8 votes, one has 6 votes, and one has 5 votes. So this right here is the number of votes for each person, which is also what we call the weight. So what I do is I set up the notation. We use a little bracket. I put the quota first, and then I go ahead and list these from greatest to least. So I'm going to list the 8, and then the 6, and then the 5, and then the 2. So when I look at this notation, I know it's a weighted voting system. I need 12 votes to pass a motion. I know that player 1 has 8 votes, player 2 has 6 votes, player 3 has 5 votes, and player 4 has 2 votes. All right, so let's try a slightly more complicated example. This one is out of your book. So 4 partners need $200,000 to start a business. They issue 20 shares at $10,000 each. So player 1 buys 8 shares, player 2 buys 7 shares, player 3 buys 3 shares, and player 4 buys 2 shares. So 1 share equals 1 vote, and we're going to set the quota at 2/3 of the total votes. So if we do the notation, I don't really know the quota yet, so I'm going to leave the quota blank. So I'll put that number right here in a minute. I know we have 8, so each share is a vote. So 8 votes, 7 votes, 3 votes, and 2 votes. Okay, so I've got the weights in there. Now I just need to go back and figure the quota. So I do need to know total number of votes. So I add all my weights together. 8, 7, 3, and 2, and that should be 20 votes. So I want to set this particular quota at 2/3 of the votes. So they're asking for something that's bigger than a majority but less than the total number of votes. So for the quota, I'm going to do 2/3 of the total number of votes, which is 20. So if you just put that in your calculator, you can just do 2/3 in parentheses times 20. You'll see it comes out about 13.3 votes. Okay, so we can't have a partial vote. That is impossible. If we round down, we're not going to have 2/3. It's going to be too low. So we're going to round that up. So that's going to be 14 votes. Okay, so that's how many we want for our quota. So that's what we put in that first spot. All right, so for the next example, we're taking the same players. Notice the votes are the same, but the quota is changing. So we want to know, is it okay to have a quota of 10? And is it okay to have a quota of 21? So just as a reminder, the quota can go anywhere from the majority to the total number of votes. So it might not be a bad idea to just calculate those numbers. Remember, there's 20 votes altogether. So a majority would be more than half. So half would be 10. If I bump that up, that would be 11. And then remember, total number of votes is 20. So my quota has to be somewhere from 11 to 20. It's okay if it is 11, it's okay if it's 20, and it's okay if it's any number in between. So if we look at this problem, they're wanting a quota of 10. So no, this is too small. Okay, and if you're asked for a reason or an explanation, I would say it is less than a majority. Okay, and if we look at the second example, they're wanting a quota of 21. So that means we'd need 21 votes to pass a motion. It would make it really hard to pass a motion because there's only 20 votes altogether. So it would be impossible to get to 21. So I'm going to say no, this is too big, because it is more than the total votes. Okay, so that quota just changes. It can vary, but it has to fall from the majority to the total number of votes. All right, one more example for this video, and then we'll put the last 2 pages on the next video. This is example 3. We have 5 partners, so P1 through P3, and they jointly own this electric company. So player 1 has 15 shares. Player 2 has 12, 3 and 4 both own 10, and player 5 owns 3 shares. So 1 share equals 1 vote. That's kind of important because that'll help us get our total number of votes. Describe the partnership as a weighted voting system using the standard notation if decisions are made by a simple majority. All right, so what I like to do is I like to leave the quota blank and set up all the players. So I'm going to leave the quota for a minute. That's going to go here. I've got 12. Oops, I messed up. 15. 15 goes first. So always list your biggest one first. Let me go back and fix that. So we've got 15, then 12. Now notice 2 people have 10, so we need to list that one twice. And then the last one owns 3 shares. All right, so I've got everything but the quota, so I'm going to go back and calculate that. So let's get total number of votes. I'm going to add up the 15, the 12, the 10, the 10, and the 3. And let's see, that'd be 35, 47, 50. So that's a total of 50 votes. So if I think about what a majority would be, I would half that. That would give me 25, but remember a majority is more than half, so I'm always going to bump that number up 1. My majority would be 26. All right, so I'm going to put that in place on my quota, so I'm going to put 26 right here. For this one, I want to do 2/3 of the vote. You have to be a little bit careful when you've already done the majority. I want 2/3 of the total number of votes. So be careful not to stick the 26 in there. That would be 2/3 of 50. So if I do 2/3 times 50, it comes out, not very pretty, about 33.3. I can't do a partial vote. I do want to round that up. If it comes out exact, you can leave it, but if it comes out a decimal, you're going to bump it up. So 2/3 would be 34 votes. So I'm going to keep the notation exactly the same as part A, but I'm just going to change my quota from 26 to 34. And then the weights, or the number of votes, those stay exactly the same.